Hey guys, I'm Ellie,
And I'm Gary.
and we are Amnesty International at The Ohio State University, and we're here to talk to you today about reproductive justice in Ohio. So, just going over the objectives for today, really quick. First off, we're going to start with a little brief history of Ohio and what access to reproductive health care looks like in Ohio. And then we're going to move on to talk about some of the federal legislation acts that play into abortion access by state. And then we're going to talk about the organizations that are on the front line of this great activism work. And then finally, we're going to talk about COVID-19 and what kind of restrictions this has brought upon healthcare in Ohio. So, why are we talking about women's health today as a human right? So, sexual and reproductive rights are under increased threat in the United States and around the world. When women are unable to have access to proper reproductive care, their ability to be safe, work, receive proper health care, get an education, start families, and pursue their life goals are all jeopardized. So, overall, what we need to know from this presentation is that family planning is not a privilege, it is a human right. And what women do with their bodies is their own right. So with that premise, we're going to go ahead and talk about the history of what reproductive rights has looked like in Ohio under various leadership. So we're going to start with talking about good old John Kasich. He was our governor from 2011 to 2019. When he was in office, he signed an abortion ban that bans an abortion after 20 weeks. And when he did that, he also was presented with the option of putting in a very stricter measure in that bill that would make it so that once you detect the heartbeat, a woman would not be able to receive an abortion. And he actually vetoed that part of the bill. And in addition, you can see from the quote below that Kasich has always been a strong proponent of defunding Planned Parenthood and making sure that federal funds and that people's insurance will not be accepted at Planned Parenthood. So that was John Kasich. And then next, we're just going to quickly highlight what our current governor and our new governor, Mike DeWine, is doing. He was elected in 2019, and going against the advice of medical professionals, he signed on a heartbeat bill, which bans abortion after 6 weeks. And this is the bill that Kasich had previously rejected. So DeWine signed that bill, and that is our current legislation that mandates abortions in Ohio. And so another thing that DeWine did that was notable was under COVID-19, he deemed that abortions would be non-essential services that were elective procedures, and that clinics should stop providing these procedures at this time during the pandemic. And this was largely due to concerns about ventilators and having the proper materials for people when they're in the hospital. But we all know this is just another way that states are looking to restrict abortion access. And then another individual that we'd like to highlight when we talk about women's rights in Ohio, someone who's been on the front lines of this work is Joyce Beatty. She's the head of the Democratic Women's Caucus. She was the first female Democratic House leader in Ohio's history in 2009. Joyce, if you couldn't tell, is pro-choice and supports access to safe, legal abortions without restrictions. She has introduced bipartisan legislation that would improve clinical trial research in order to reduce and eliminate gender racial health disparities. She also voted yes on the Violence Against Women Act, which would help to decrease violence against women in the home. And then she also helped to work to enforce a bill that would eliminate wage discrimination based on gender. And then overall, Joyce has received just countless awards for her work on women's rights and also for African-American women's rights in Ohio. So thank you, Joyce. And I just thought that that's a representative. As a congresswoman, I don't think that people in Columbus know as much about her, but she is a representative in Columbus, so everyone needs to know about this great woman doing this great work for us on the front lines. And so that was just a little bit about the history of Ohio and like some important figures and what they've been doing. But now we're going to go ahead and talk about the organizations that are on the front line of this work.
Sorry, before we talk about the organizations, we're going to talk about some of the federal actions that have happened in the history of women's rights and reproductive rights. So first of all, at the federal level, the courts are really the main actors on women's reproductive rights. I'm sure most of you have at least heard of Roe v. Wade, which its main component was that it made abortions a constitutional right that states cannot ban. And it is the key ruling in a lot of for women's health and reproductive rights at the federal level. And this ruling has been confirmed by the Supreme Court as recently as 2016. Overall, in contrast to the courts, there has been very little federal legislation or legislative action has been taken on women's health, and often Congress leaves this responsibility to the states to decide. However, we did find one proposed legislation in 2019 that was, or two pieces of legislation, of corresponding legislation in the Senate and House of Representatives that collectively are called the Women's Health Protection Act of 2019. And its short description is that it's a bill to protect women's ability to determine whether and when to bear a child or end a pregnancy, and to protect a healthcare provider's ability to provide reproductive healthcare services, including abortion services. And overall, this bill's proponents say that it's meant to cement the women's health firmly in Congress and at the federal level, not just leaving it to the states. And now we're going to cover some of the organizations that are on the front lines working for women's health and reproductive rights. So first of all is Planned Parenthood, which is a direct service organization that offers a wide range of health services to all genders, not just women. But they cover sex education, reproductive rights advocacy, testing and treatment for STIs and cervical cancer, along with other reproductive health services. And it's also important to note that despite what some politicians may say, abortion education and services only account for less than 1% of their services, and they provide a much wider range of services, as we've covered, that are equally as important. And in the state of Ohio, there are over 19 Planned Parenthood centers in the state of Ohio. And this organization also covers a lot of advocacy issues as well, not just direct service. So it's just another element of what Planned Parenthood does. Next, I'm going to briefly mention the ACLU of Ohio. And it's connected to the larger American Civil Liberties Union, which also works on many of the same human rights issues as Amnesty International and Planned Parenthood, but they go about it at through more legal means as opposed to direct service like Planned Parenthood does, or through advocacy, which is what we do. So they're also a very important partner organization to us. And then finally, I want to cover the Women's March Ohio, which is the Ohio branch of the larger International Women's March Movement organization, which is devoted to protecting women's rights in Ohio. The Ohio branch is devoted to protecting women's rights in the state of Ohio. And its main advocacy issues are abortion rights, civil rights, and economic justice for women. Of course, this organization, as the international organization, came about, was founded in 2017, I believe, and it precipitated from mostly from the from the first International Women's March in 2017 after the election of Donald Trump. And a women's march has been held in various locations, including Ohio, since January of 2017, and are usually held in January of each year. Next, so those were some of the organizations that are involved in women's rights and reproductive rights. So now we're going to cover what that looks like under 2019, under COVID 2019. So unfortunately, as you mentioned before, abortion in states, not just in Ohio, but in states such as Ohio, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Alabama have all deemed abortion elective service, and therefore have halted all abortions across their states. Proponents of this action say that the closures are due to shortages of personnel, personal protective equipment, but the reality is that abortion is an essential service for many women and needs to continue even under a pandemic. So currently we have a petition going. As you could have seen if you looked at our email, we have a petition, a link to the petition there. We're also going to have that link in our social media for you guys to sign. And it's a petition to that'll be sent to the governments of these states, telling them that abortion is a essential service and that they need to make sure that the clinics stay open.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so now we're going to touch on really quick how Amnesty interacts with women's rights and what their campaigning work looks like. Okay, so women's rights are incorporated into the campaign of sexual and reproductive rights, which is an international campaign that Amnesty works on. And then we also have a domestic campaign. But what that looks like both domestically and internationally is working on women's suffrage, reproductive rights, like legalizing and making abortion more accessible, gender-based violence, sexual harassment, workplace discrimination, and just a lot more issues. And the reason why Amnesty works on them is, as we said before, women's rights are human rights, and all of these restrictions are infringing on women's rights to live free from violence and discrimination, to enjoy and obtain the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, and to be educated, to own property, to vote, to make an equal wage. Women across the country are seeing, and across the world are seeing, attacks on these rights. So while we are focusing today on what women's rights look like in Ohio, and we obviously have amazing campaigners from Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Amnesty International on the front lines in Ohio, all these organizations are also and more working to work on these issues abroad as well. So that's Amnesty's work with the topic. And now we're going to go ahead and move into a little bit of a Q&A. If everyone could just think about, maybe take a minute to think about what are some questions and comments you might have for us? What are some maybe personal experiences with reproductive justice that you'd like to share? And just take a minute to think about what you'd like to bring to the table or ask, and we'll go ahead and discuss. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Once again, these are our Twitter handle and our Instagram page. Once again, look at those for petition and for petition links or for any kind of actions that we're going to be doing or just general updates. All right.
Yes, follow.
Now we're going to move on to the question and answer and discussion portion. All right. Thank you.